Thanks again for everyone coming to Entreport for the Santa Barbara JavaScript meetup. It's good to host everyone and see some more familiar faces. Next week, we're going to be doing this at Pro Tour.
Next week?
Next month.
Next month, October 19th.
So yeah, thanks again for coming out. We got 3 speakers today, and I'll hand it off to Garvin.
All right.
Hello, lots of new faces today. Very stoked to see everyone. I'm Garvin. I'm one of the organizers for Santa Barbara JavaScript. Thank you very much to Entreport for hosting us. We have a couple other sponsors in town that we're very thankful for as well. Work Zones, one of our #1 places to host. We have Procore and Invoca and PayJunction. So if you are working at any of those companies, thanks very much for coming. And yeah, like Vinh mentioned, October 19th, we are having lightning talks, which is a short format where there's maybe 10 speakers speaking for about 5 minutes each. So just like a little overview of one topic, lasts about an hour, down at Procore. Really fun. If you're interested in speaking, just let me know. And we have a sign-up sheet in the meetup group also. One more thing, we also have a Slack network. If anybody's interested in joining and talking about JavaScript, feel free to join. All right, let's do this. James?
Hey y'all. Hey y'all.
Howdy. Don't forget that airplane,
Yeah,
please.
1 second. How's everybody doing? Good. Thanks for coming out. Thanks to Entreport for hosting. It's a lovely space. I haven't been here before. It's great. So thanks. Does anyone know a joke?
Stop hating on programming languages.
We good? We good?
So
Is the
we good? Hello.
Let's just turn everything on.
I think we might be in business. That's fine. It's going. Oh yeah. Great. We're good.
Well, sorry, you get James' audio from his screen. Hi everyone. How's everyone doing? Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Vinh. I'm doing my talk on Webpack, crash course to Webpack and just using Webpack in general. Who here has used Webpack before?
I think you're sharing the wrong screen. I think in the StreamYard you can select. Oh yeah, okay, from here, that's cool.
Then we'll pop it back.
Sweet. Oh, actually, now you're gonna have to share again. Sorry.
That's good.
New stream problems. There we go. Yeah. Infinity. All right.
Okay, who's used Webpack before? Oh, a lot of hands. Who uses Webpack on like personal projects? Work projects? So here at Entreport, we started using Webpack about a year ago, and it's been quite a journey in learning something new. And I'm going to share some of the things I've learned and give you a crash course in what Webpack is and how it works. So 12 bullet points on what we're going to cover today. Hopefully it'll be go by pretty quick. So what is Webpack? It's basically a file bundler. You give it a bunch of JavaScript files, and then it'll output just a single JavaScript file. You give it a whole bunch of CSS files, and it'll package it all together and bundle it into a single CSS file. And you can kind of say it's like a little mini compiler. How's it work? So you've got a whole bunch of loaders, and then you chain them together in sequence. And once your whole chain is done, then it outputs your single bundle at the end. What's a loader? Loader chooses what files to process. So you tell it, do I want to process CSS files, JavaScript files, image files, font files, and then the loaders figure out what to do with that, whether to compile them all together, whether to transform some things. But the loader's responsibility is just to be chained together, pass it on to the next loader, then ultimately ends up in a single bundle. The ecosystem for Webpack is pretty good. If anything you can imagine, there's probably a loader for it. There's probably a Reason loader. I'm just imagining that there is one. But there's a ton of plugins and loaders out there for you to use. So let's jump into some code and some config files. For a Webpack config, there's three main things. There's an entry, where to start. Output, what's the name of the thing that you're gonna output, and then a bunch of rules. Rules are where you chain all of those loaders together. So we'll check that out in the config file right now. Oh wait, this is done. I have all of my code. Oh, let's take a pause.
We can just look at production GitHub, right?
What's that? There's plenty of pizza and drinks left. Shots. Really shots.
Anybody wants to see themselves? Oh. Oh.
Yeah.
There you are.
Do you see anything?
Yeah, we're good.
All part of the show. So going back to that source code. All right, so this is our very basic config file. And what I mentioned earlier is you got this entry. So typically it's just going to be your index.js. This is where when Webpack builds this kind of dependency tree of what should I compile all together, you just tell it start here, and that's what the entry point is. This is what I decided to name my output. Give it a name, then you give it a path. There's some optimization stuff that we'll check out later. And then this is the module rules. You see I've got a bunch of stuff commented out through the process of this presentation. I'll start uncommenting them. But you've got some JavaScript stuff and then some CSS stuff down here. So that's your basic configuration file. Entry, output, and rules.
What problem is this?
What problem does it solve? Let's see. So when you first start web development, you start off with just a single file, index.js, app.js, and then you put all of your source code, all your logic in that one file. Well, as you start beginning to develop a bigger project, you want separate files. And then in your web page, like, well, do I include all of those scripts into one? Now I've got like 100 files for my app, and I've got to include all 100 of them. Or you could build it into one single bundle. And there were tools before like Google Closure Compile that would do that for you. But Webpack is one of the tools now. It's kind of become dominant in the industry of like, this is how you build stuff. There's other stuff like Rollup. There are other tools out there. But for this one, the idea that you can chain a bunch of tools together, a bunch of loaders together, where it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. I only want to do CSS stuff, JavaScript stuff. I'm doing React. Let me grab the React plugin. So it's really configurable in how to do it. And then it's easily, then you just fire it up and keep running it all the time. So bundling all the files together in a smart way.
I think it became really popular when ES6 started coming out and people were transpiling their code from like modern ES6 JavaScript back to backwards compatible. So like in particular with JavaScript modules where you can like import and export different modules.
With the configuration essentially, because that's where the idea that you kind of reconfigure your site, like, oh, now we're going to start using this technology. Cool. Just change like a couple of lines here, and then start sucking in a completely different tool set, basically.
Yeah, like you can have React and JavaScript modules, and then have a different loaders for each one that'll process the files as you go, and then compile it into backwards compatible JavaScript in one file.
One of the things I'm going to do is we're going to write the demo app is in ES6 code, and then let's say you want to be able to support ES5. This Babel loader here, it'll be in charge of transpiling down to ES5 so that it can be used by a wider range of browsers. Okay. Otherwise, you don't care about those browsers and you just have ES6 code and you just skip this stuff.
And just a question maybe for the future. I know that a lot of this functionality can be, or problems can be solved by Go. So if you can maybe mention sometime later how Webpack is better than Go. Like, it doesn't do anything more than Go can do.
So I think before Webpack, Grunt and Gulp were pretty popular tools and like a chain set of tools. And slowly over time, Webpack just became used more and more popular, as far as I know. For all the blog articles that I read and the industry that are the tool that we decided to keep. They're probably similar. You could accomplish the same thing as with any other tool out there. But I feel like Webpack has just become more popular in the last couple of years.
I think Webpack can do more than
Yeah, and I imagine with the ecosystem of all the loaders and plugins available with Webpack, I don't remember if you can do that with Gulp, but the ecosystem out there is pretty good.
Gulp specifically is like a task runner, and then this is with more of a module bundler with like loaders that can process the files as it goes. And I think that using task runners in particular has fallen out of favor compared to just using like npm scripts. Pretty much can get the same thing done.
Very quick intro to the config file. And so where's the F5? This is my app. The football season kicked off this weekend, and I'm a big fantasy football player. So this is the demo app. So I've designed a league, and the league has a bunch of teams in there. Each team has a manager, and there's just this random utilities module that I added just for the purpose of the demo. So one of the things we'll go over is watching files, but let's take a look at the app. So here's the demo. Hey, cool. It just says, welcome back to fantasy football. It's got some team names and this mysterious draft order right now. And this is all the app does for now. And if we take a look at our code, again, you got the league. This is written in ES6. I've got some classes. I'm using export and import. League is pulling in utils. I've got a manager. I've got a league. And this is index.js. Remember, this is the entry port into my app. And so I've just got some scaffolding here to create data and to dump out some HTML. But one thing I'm gonna do is, let's run this. So along with Webpack, I use npm to run everything. And some of the scripts that I run with npm is just good old build. So let's fire that up in my oh, this is the wrong folder. You can't see that. There you go. So it started that entry file, and it's going through all the dependencies and figured out, okay, I spit out this main.bundle.js. And now we take a look at my index file. Instead of just loading an index.js file like you normally would, I want to load in that new bundle that I just compiled. And all should be good in the work. Because really, at this point, I haven't done anything except for compile everything into one giant bundle. If we take a look at the network tab, oh, good, pure programming. Yeah. So main.bundle is the file that we're loading in right now, and right now it's at 9 kilobytes. So that's just an intro. Like we've just bundled a bunch of like 4 different JavaScript files and put them into one and load it into our app. So it's kind of cumbersome to sit here and like hit run build every time I make a code change. So one of the things that you can do with the Webpack is turn on watching files. And this makes it so that whenever I update a source code file, then it'll automatically run everything and recompile everything, and I can jump back to my browser. Not as fast as Reason probably, but this is what we got with Webpack. So I go back to my Webpack config and just turn on the simple flag, watch to true, and now it's going to watch all the files. And now I'm going to run my build. Cool. So now it's sitting here and Webpack is watching files. And I can go to my index.js. I'm going to add some CSS to my page because it looks pretty bland. And now I've got some CSS in my code, or in my package now. And now as soon as I jump over here, it try to recompile, and now Webpack doesn't know what to do with this CSS. It doesn't know the syntax. So this is the power of Webpack is now I need to tell Webpack or tell my build like, hey, you need to be able to handle this CSS file. So now we go back to our config, and I've got all of this ready to go. So here we're in our module rules, and this is I'm telling it for anything that matches a CSS file, use the CSS loader and the style loader. Unfortunately, with watching files, it doesn't watch when I make updates to the config file. So let's just kill this and then run it again. And you notice now no errors. It knows how to handle the CSS. And now bundle looks a little bit bigger, 30.7. And let's take a look at our app now. Cool. You got some fonts. You got some beautiful green background. And so we've got that. We've now got CSS in our thing, in our package. And again, with the watch file, I can comment this out, pop over to the terminal, see that it's been built, and then come back here. And the style's a little bit different because I took away some CSS. Cool. What are we going to do next? That's great. So one of the things is all of that CSS got dumped into that JavaScript file, and it magically worked. Let's say now we tell Webpack, I want to make a separate bundle of just my CSS files, and we use that using the mini CSS extract plugin. So going back, let's see, where's my plugins? So down here, I tell the plugin, I add the plugin here, and then with mini CSS extract plugin, I specify a path, I give it a file name. So now I'm telling Webpack, when you look at CSS files, I want you to dump it into this production CSS file. Or put them all together into this production CSS. And now we'll run this again. And, oh no, it's still not ready to go. Oh, because I was telling Webpack to say use the CSS loader and the style loader. So now I want to tell it to use this loader instead. And this. Cool. Now you see there's a production CSS file and the main bundle JavaScript, and this JavaScript is way smaller than it was before. So let's take a look at our app. Oh, it's still not there because in our index file, we have to tell it to use our production CSS. Here you go. Now we're back to this. So what we did there is now that instead of having just a JavaScript file, now we have a JavaScript file and a production CSS file. Now let's see if we just right click on this and inspect it. We took out this little header here. That's not a good one. Let's do this. So right now we're saying this is coming from production CSS. And with a really big app, you're going to have like 10 different CSS files and you want to make updates. When you inspect this, you're like, well, I don't know what file of production CSS caused this. So normally so then we can do source maps. So you can map the production CSS file to the original CSS file that came to this, got bundled inside of it. So I can quickly now just use this other plugin called Optimize CSS Assets. And what this will do is it will minify your CSS and then also create source maps. So you can finally quickly find out what CSS file that you need to update. Go back here. You can go there. And so now you're at production CSS, the file gets bigger. Whenever you add source maps, the file size gets bigger because it's keeping track of where the source code originally came from. So as we do this, the file sizes are going to get bigger when we add source maps. So you take a look at this now.
Isn't it bad for performance?
So this is the different things that Webpack offers. There's a development mode and a production mode. Development mode, the file sizes will be bigger, the build will be a little bit slower, but you have access to like the source maps that you can easily debug. When you get to production, you don't include source maps. They do a lot more optimizations for smaller file sizes.
How do you debug production?
We can get into that. But having source maps is the beginning of it, because who likes to look or who's tried to debug production minified code? It's awful. And when you have source maps available, then it becomes much more easy. But of course, you wouldn't put that on your production servers.
That's why I asked.
So now you take a look, hey, production CSS is not really production CSS, it's index CSS. And I can jump over there and I can see my original styles. Bundling, watching, unifying CSS, and now.
To refresh it to see your changes. I thought Webpack can do like an instant, like not even having to refresh.
So because I'm changing the Webpack config file, I have to rebuild it. But if this was all set up as I'm making the source code changes, like I showed before, it'll rebuild real quick. But I just keep making config file changes right now.
You're talking about refreshing the browser, or?
Yeah, I thought it could do it without even refreshing.
Do hot instead?
Like hot module loading, you can set that up too, but we're not going to cover that today. If you use loaders, I kind of did a crash course on that of like loaders look at individual files. We looked at loaders. There's that CSS loader, that style loader. We took a peek at the Babel loader. But then for the CSS bundling and minifying, we use plugins. So what's the difference in the Webpack ecosystem? So loaders, they take a look at each file individually, and those get processed, and you might do some transformation or some changes for that particular file. A plugin works at the bundle level. Once everything's been put together, it'll do some more different transformations to that completed bundle. So before we talked about Babel loader transforming ES6 to ES5. As it touches each file, it does that transformation, that transpiling. With the plugin, with the optimized CSS, once we had all of that CSS, let's dump it out to a different file. With the optimized one, let's take that CSS, minify it, and then also generate source nodes for it. So loaders work on a file level, plugins work on more of a bundle level. Managing assets, so if you've got like images in your CSS, here's another use case. So you've got your image in like a local dev folder, but when it goes to production, there's a special production folder that all the images are in. So let's walk through how to do that with Webpack. Going back to our config file. And here we go. So I just added another loader, file loader, and it tells it to look for JPEGs and PNGs. And what it's going to do is it's going to take just the original file name and the original extension and dump it out to this assets folder. And in my CSS, instead of having like that nasty background, green background, I'm going to actually point it to an image with a folder with an image. And notice in the structure here, like my images in the dev environment is here in images, but eventually I'm going to want it to dump it out and to distribute this disk folder under the assets folder. So with that configuration update, something's wrong that way. You need an appropriate loader. Oh, because it caught my changes on the fly and tried to rebuild it, but the config file wasn't updated yet. So here we go. Cool. So we have our bundle.js, we have our production.js, and now we see that this image that we just looked at is now in the assets folder. Okay. Hey, cool. That looks way better than it did before. Probably because I took it from the Yahoo Fantasy Football site. And then transpiling to ES5, thing that we talked about earlier. So all of this code has been written in ES6, and if you take a look at it and inspect it, it looks, you still see the ES6 class being output here. But of course, like these older browsers, like let's say, I don't know, IE, whatever, doesn't support it. So let's transpile it down to ES5. So this is saying for any JavaScript file, use the Babel loader, and this preset end says transpile it down to ES5. So let's take a look at our bundle now. And the same thing, so we're looking at that same league.js, and you don't see the ES6 class, you see all this other magic to make a class-like thing. That's another thing. So code splitting. One of the cool things about Webpack is the ability to code split. So that says, even though we spent all of this time to take, all the 4 files and bundle it into one, there are some cases where you still want to have it in separate files. Back in the day, it used to be let's do one request for one file, no matter what the size. But now it's kind of let's do a lot of optimally sized requests and do a lot of them. So instead of, I think Webpack says anything over 500K is too big, and like you should start code splitting it up into smaller pieces. And we can set that up pretty easily with the config file.
That sort of level is based on what CDNs work, or like.
I don't know where Webpack got like that number, but they've done their research in that the time it takes to make a request for a 10 meg file, wait for it to come back, parse it up, is a lot longer than having 5 2 meg chunks and doing all the roundabouts.
It's part of how the browser works, sort of stuff also that to show up.
Yeah, and it's like they backed it up with data, like they've done tests, like, okay, this is about the optimal.
I thought it's because of HTTP2.
HTTP, when everyone starts using HTTP2, then it won't matter because it's just a constant stream going back and forth. And we won't really have to worry about the request. But since most of us are still using 1.1, the number of requests and the file size and all that still matters. So then code splitting. So earlier there's optimization block that we ignored. We're going to start unveiling some of it. So what the optimization split chunks property of the config says is, I want to split some code into smaller chunks, and then it kind of follows the module rules. I got a test. So for utils.js, I want the bundle or this code split bundle to be name utils. This is like the file format, the naming format of the thing. And then this says, at minimum, I want this code thing that I want to split up to be used at least once, and the minimum size of it has to be at least 100 bytes. So you notice now we've got the image, production.js, main bundle, and now we got this new one, utils bundle. And it's basically the contents of that utilities file that we just looked at. And really, through Webpack's kind of optimizations, if I don't change the minimum size, and I do this again, it won't even generate the utils bundle because it's saying that little utils is only so big, like it doesn't make sense. It's not going to be optimal for me to separate it out and then have the main bundle reference it. So Webpack just made the decision for me. It's like, hey, I'm not going to make this bundle for you. It's only because I tell it, hey, I don't care. I want the bundle. If it's just 100 bytes, I'm cool with that. Create the bundle anyway. And then there's also the minimum chunks too. Like, I think by default it's min chunks of 2. That means if 2 other bundles reference that utils 2 times, then it'll be separated. But if it's only referenced 1 time, then it's not going to create the bundle. But only because I've configured it to do just 1, it's creating the separate bundle right now. And we talked about earlier about development mode and production mode. Development is optimized for ease of debugging, faster to compile. Production is smaller bundle size and faster at runtime. And then if we take a look at the package JSON that I had earlier, when you run Webpack, you can pass it the mode for development or production. And when Webpack 4 came out, one of the things that they wanted to do was this like 0 config. You could just start with almost an empty Webpack config file, and a lot of this magic would happen for you. Some of the magic that happens when you're in dev mode is it automatically does the source maps for you. And then for even without specifying any configurations. And then with the production mode, it'll automatically minify and optimize that bundle that's output without any other extra configuration. Because a lot of the new tools that were coming out, like, oh, 0 configuration, anyone could just jump in and start coding and start getting stuff done right away. So Webpack was trying to follow that trend. We talked about source maps before. Source maps is controlled by the dev tools, or the dev tool property. There's a whole different types of dev tool values that you pass in here, and it's a big balance of what do you want. Do you want really robust and helpful source maps where it's basically the exact copy of the code, your source code? Or do you want, that means your file size is going to be really big. Or do you want some source maps that give you enough information to like figure out what your code was doing before? And then the value of that is your source maps and your bundles are a little bit small. So what have we done here? We started off with a really ugly looking fantasy football app, and then we had 4 different files in it, and then now we bundled it all together in a single main bundle.js. We had a bunch of CSS files. We bundled it down to a single production.js. We figured out what to do with images and how to automatically move it and have your CSS still reference the same one. We've learned some tricks with code dev using the dev tool and to create source maps. And then we also showed you how to like find the source maps when you're in the debug mode. So like when production.css was just 1 file, then we were able to find like the lead.css stuff with all the source maps from CSS stuff and for JavaScript stuff. Here's some resources that were helpful for me as I was trying to figure out Webpack on my own and for this presentation. And all the slides, I'll share it out to the group later. That's it. Any questions? Yes.
Real quick, I mean, you talked about browser being ES6 versus ES5 compatible. Can you set this up such that it will kind of render both, and so then you've got 2 different packs essentially, depending which browser is making the request, and it's sort of one versus the other.
I'm pretty sure there are other loaders out there that it'll be smart, like what browser is this coming from, and to serve this thing or have this bundle ready. And if it's for this browser, have that bundle ready. Yeah, and this is just like scratching the surface. There's so many more loaders and features of Webpack that are out there. This is just an intro to what I've learned. Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone.
I know, right?
Sweet.
Yeah. How's it going, everyone?
Hey.
Really enjoyed the previous two talks. My name is Jacob, and I'm here to talk about PWAs. I'm mostly a front-end developer working with React, things like Gatsby and Next, if you ever kind of know what those React frameworks are. I do a lot of freelance stuff, plenty of clients that just mostly front-end kind of UI stuff with headless CMSs, such as like WordPress and Contentful. And so I've had to do a lot of pulling in data, working with kind of servers that aren't built by me or people I know. And so with all of that, progressive web applications have been something I've low-key obsessed over for a while now. And I've just kind of really jumped on the PWA train. Who here is kind of, would say they're pretty familiar with what PWAs are? Okay, got a handful of people. Cool. I'm here to kind of give a brief overview of kind of what PWAs are and kind of some of the magic you can do with things like service workers, which are involved, and I'll get to those. So I want to give a quick, like, kind of a history of kind of how the concept of PWAs came in. It's kind of hilarious because everyone was seemingly trying to get PWAs going, and everyone was failing until Google just basically said, all right, we're gonna make this a priority now. And now it's kind of working out. The concept of PWAs kind of started way back in 2007 when Steve Jobs announced the iPhone and what iPhone apps were going to be. The original iPhone app was actually like an HTML page with like Ajax architecture that was served on the iPhone screen with the Safari engine. So it was just like websites on your front page of your iPhone. And that was kind of the original concept of the PWA on a massive scale. And literally a year later, they kind of squashed it. It was like, we're going to the App Store with like native code and whatnot. So the PWA concept kind of went out the door the next year. Until, early 2010s, the dynamic websites kind of came into play where they, they're kind of more greater interactivity with websites, making it a lot more mobile friendly. They really started to pick up steam early 2010s, where things like even Firefox OS, if you ever heard of that, it was a literal mobile operating system that was Firefox that tried to do exactly what Apple was doing early on, where their Firefox OS apps were going to be websites. And then they discontinued that like 3 years later. And then finally Google came in and was like, here's a thing called a progressive web app, and we're going to actually prioritize this from here on out. And here we are, 4 years later, progressive web apps are really, really becoming a thing. So what is a PWA? One of my favorite definitions of a progressive web app is by Flavio Copes. And he basically describes a PWA as web apps that take advantage of modern browser features like web workers and the web app manifest to really let mobile devices kind of upgrade the website to the role of a first-class citizen app. There's a lot of core features with really different characteristics that really describe a PWA. A few of which being just that they're responsive, and not just responsive, but that they're specifically mobile first. That mobile is more of a priority than kind of other aspects of a website, making it really fast with caching and things like that, which I'll get to in a minute. They have a real native app-like feel, and why that's so important is because they are installable. And as of recently, I think in Chrome 73, you can actually install PWAs on your desktop. And so there's like no browser involved. You can have your website open up. You have a little icon on your desktop that you can click, and it'll open up almost like a native desktop app, but it's a literal website. It's kind of pretty cool. And then the same thing goes with mobile devices. You can kind of install regular websites on your home screen, and so that it actually feels kind of like an actual app that you can use. There's also offline support, so that websites are actually usable. You can kind of scroll through the different pages and stuff, and even though you have like no network connection, which is super cool, obviously that only works after the first initial load of the site. And then the PWAs are also served over HTTPS specifically. It's not a PWA if it's not, just because of the nature of service workers, which we'll get into. So why would you actually want to prioritize kind of these features, other than kind of the more obvious things you can kind of see from those previous points? PWAs are a lot lighter. A native mobile app would probably take around maybe 100 megabytes of storage on your phone. Whereas if you wanted to install a PWA, those can easily stay within the kilobyte range. So it's really nice to kind of, if you have tons of photos in your camera roll. They're also backwards compatible. No need for having to have a certain version of iOS or something like that that you need to use for the website, because in essence it is just a website. You can if your grandma still uses a flip phone from 2006, like, you can still see the site. Pretty cool. They're better optimized for search engines. You can imagine like what a mobile app would be, but on Google, there's no like middleman of an app store going on. You can kind of install it straight from your browser, and it makes it super easy. They also self-update. No need for app updates that take 5 to 30 seconds sometimes to update, and your app is unusable for a bit. You're just pulling data from a server and kind of updates on its own. With that, because it can be usable offline through like the caching API and whatnot, there is no connection endless spinning circle that would like freeze up your browser sometimes just trying to pull in a request. If there's no connection, PWAs can just recognize that, and you can add like a red banner on your site that just says, hey, you don't have a connection, but you can still use the site, parts of the site that you have cached. So there's no dino game if someone's trying to click your site. It's just right there. Same experience with in-app browsers, which this is like one of my favorite parts of this is that people can still have a really good experience if they open up your site in, say, the Instagram app when you click the link in the bio. In Instagram, in the Instagram native app, click the link in the bio, it'll open up like this mini browser in the Instagram app, and I've seen plenty of sites that just look terrible in those browsers, like in Facebook and Instagram. PWAs work really well with those. Kind of helps generate more leads if you're trying to sell some things, and it just fits really nicely in things like that. If you're sharing a lot of links, if your site content is shared a lot, it's really good to have a PWA kind of standard with the site so that people can open it up in browsers, and then the browsers in the apps. And it also, this is like really where the magic happens. We can write what I like to call bridge code. That's totally not technical at all. I just kind of made it up. It makes sense. You can actually write code in the service workers that isn't really subject to the client. It's not loading in the client. In fact, the service worker code runs, I call it bridge code, runs before anything is loaded on the DOM. But it's also not in the server because it's still usable offline. So I kind of call it bridge code. It kind of sits in between the client and the server. And you can do really fun stuff like intercept fetch requests. We'll get to in a second. So in essence, PWAs are just HTML sites on steroids. And enjoy that. There's a handful of use cases for this. On a massive scale, the two biggest use cases that I've seen for PWAs is the Twitter and the Pinterest web app. Those two companies have both highly documented their journey in embracing the PWA on their mobile device or on mobile browsers. Just because tweets and pins get shared a ton, and their engagement just went up like crazy when they really embraced PWA like features and whatnot. You can also do cool things like on e-commerce sites. Say if you have a lot of customers that are ordering things from an e-commerce site and they don't have a Wi-Fi connection, well, you can still add stuff to the cart and it'll save for next time even though you don't have a Wi-Fi connection. You can do really cool stuff like that and still have features used without a network connection. And one of my favorite examples, I really hoping this kind of catches on, is conferences and meetups, their websites. I went to a conference in Chicago earlier this summer for a React conference, and the moment I walked into there, the Wi-Fi was awful, and I had zero network connection. It was just like nothing. I basically was signing away my life to airplane mode for like the whole day. If only they had had their website as a PWA that I could install on my phone to use offline, I could still check the schedule. I could still see, different information for the conference, and places like that. If you have a lot of people and Wi-Fi is awful, it's a really good use case. So I hope that really catches on with a lot of conferences, because a native app is just kind of an overkill sometimes for that stuff. PWA fits it well. So here's where things get fun. There's two main concepts, or two main parts of making a PWA a PWA. The first is a service worker. The second is a web app manifest. I'll get to that in a second. Service workers are really fun because that's kind of that bridge code I was talking about. Kind of happens outside of the client, but obviously not in the work. There's kind of three main steps to a service worker that allows it to kind of work with your website. The first is registration. Each service worker, the server is just a file that usually just sits in your root folder, or I guess you can put it wherever, because you kind of point to it with the register method. But in registration, it is step 1 of 3 of making a service worker work on a PWA. And so in the registration, you see it is registered. So just call it worker.js. That'll be the service worker file. And then when you go through registration, you kind of follow the console log, make sure everything's working fine. And so just say, boom, successful. Step 1's done. Service workers only register one time per browser. Once someone opens up your website and the service worker is registered, registration never happens again on that browser, unless the cache is cleared. They clear the cache or something. Might have to redo it again, but it's only going to happen one time. Once the registration happens, it goes to the installation. Here, the browser basically registers the install. Mind you, this is all happening before anything in the UI loads. We have to mention that service worker is all done loading, pre-fetching of the server. This all happens just before then. Once it's registered, we install it. And then once it's during the installation, here's where you would want to do things like caching different assets. You want to make sure that you say, okay, these are the things we want to cache, these are the things we want to save for later. And so here, for example, on my website, say I wanted to cache that PWA steroid gift we had it earlier. We're just caching it here during the install, and we're good to go. It's not cached. Once the installation is finished, we can add a event listener for the activation. And during activation, we can kind of do a lot of stuff. Check for old cache data, and you can clear the cache if you wanted. You can kind of do a lot of different things here. Generally, there's not much that the activation is just kind of basically saying, yeah, we're good to go. It's service workers working. It's all good. Once it's activated, you do a lot of really cool stuff. Say later on in development, step 4532. You can intercept fetch requests. I actually really like this. It's really fun. Requests happen obviously when client sends a signal to the server, trying to fetch an image, server sends it back, you got the image. Well, during initial upload, it's going to fetch whatever is from the server. So the very first time a particular browser loads your site, it's going to fetch all that information that it needs from the server and pull it in. After that initial load, you can actually begin to intercept fetch requests and do what you want, and you can stop them or manipulate them however you want. And so here, I'm just basically going to intercept listening for a fetch request, take the URL, make sure the URL matches what they're trying to go for. And if I notice that they're trying to fetch a boring GIF, I'm going to basically say, no, I'm not going to give you the boring GIF. I'm going to stop that request from even touching the server. It's not going to reach the server at all. I'm going to stop it halfway through, turn it around, and just give you back the PWA steroid GIF that we've already cached. And so the reason why like something like this is super helpful is because you don't have to, you can prevent, if someone is offline, you can actually prevent tons of unnecessary fetch requests that just don't need to be made if their connection is slow. So if someone's working on a particularly slow connection, maybe you can just say, all right, this would be a nice thing to fetch, and maybe a certain background image of a high resolution. But since they're working on a slow connection, we're just gonna cut that off. We're not gonna try to fetch that thing, and we'll give you an already pre-cached thing. Yes.
Is caches your global that service workers can use?
No, it's not. Yeah, there should be a lot of other stuff that I forgot to include.
No, okay.
So you would import that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really don't have that in your cache, because if it's zero, fail if they're pointed in the cache, then go submit the server request. Is that automatically, or do you have to have it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is kind of more of an example. A lot of times you would probably like regex or something like that to kind of scan through your file system to see, do I have anything like this? If not, maybe we'll just try again. Or, but usually, if you really want to have like a really backup, like a standard backup image, for example, you would really want to make sure in the installation that one file is cached upon the initial loading of the site, just so that it's like the backup. If you have that, and if it tried to search for this and it wasn't there, then your code is probably wrong in the installation event listener. So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. So that's kind of like the first main point of the first aspect of it. You can do tons of stuff with it. It's really cool. The manifest is literally just a JSON file with lots of information that provides the device kind of information that is like you're able to actually install it onto either your desktop or your mobile device. And so it's just a huge thing of information about your app. There's a few key points here. Most of it's self-explanatory. You see probably in line 5. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Sweet. In display, or on line 5, there's a display. When you're setting up a PWA to be installable on a mobile device, obviously it still uses the browser engine to make it appear on the UI. You can have certain displays that take away like browser features, which is really cool because the browser in the mobile device usually has like a top bar with a search bar and back buttons, maybe a footer with options you can do. You can say in the display to take all that stuff away, so that they either have no access to it or they only have access to it after scrolling to the bottom or something like that. And there's certain preset values for the display. And so it actually, even though it's installed using a browser under the hood, it still feels like a native app because there's no browser thing. The thing to keep in mind though is that if you're going to do that without browser buttons and whatnot, you probably want to make sure there's a back button in the UI. Just saying. Also, the theme color is really cool because if you do have that top bar, if someone's visiting your site, you can change the color of that with theme color. Orientation is also really cool. Say you're building a certain app, like a video player, or maybe you're doing a game in React, which is some people do that. You can set the orientation to portrait or landscape. And so if it's not in portrait, then kind of you can prompt the user to say, hey, turn your phone. Looks that way better. And the service worker down there is pointing to where the service worker is. Yes.
Is a lot of them pretty mobile specific, or how does that sort of translate on the desktop? There's a lot of gigs more to have one of these, like you're saying, Chrome 73 installed on desktops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much. So if it's only like, so for example, orientation is only applicable to mobile devices, it'll just use it for that. And I mean, if you need it in landscape or something, like it'll just kind of, because the browsers, you can resize the window, it usually pretty much ignores that. As far as I'm aware, at least I've never run into that problem. So, any other questions as far as service workers and web app manifests go? Yes.
Does the browser limit the cache size?
I've never run into that issue. I'm actually not sure. I would love to look that up. Let's look it up after, because I'm actually super curious now. But I do know that there's been a lot of cached like things that were a lot larger, like up into like gigabytes that have been cached, which is, I mean, it's a bad idea, but I have seen it happen. But yeah, I don't know if there's an actual cache to it.
Is it like something that you set up in a manifest, like it can define what the resource constraints are for the app? So yeah.
That's not really something you do on the manifest. That's more just working with the browser APIs with the cache. The web app manifest is just kind of like a settings thing. So if you wanted to set a cap like that, it'd probably be in the service worker file, just to make sure nothing goes over that. And then if the cache is getting too large, then you can start clearing some old assets and whatnot. Yeah. There's a question back there, right? Yeah.
With respect to service workers, you mentioned if it's on a slow speed, then it'll go to the cache faster version. How intelligent is that decision making? In terms of like, oh, I see these requests are taking a long time. I'm going to scale that.
Yeah, that's mostly like manual code stuff. So you can probably write like a timer, for example. If say like if okay, we made the fetch request here, and it's 5 seconds, and we still haven't loaded the thing, we decided that it's a slow network connection. Probably have a boolean to say slow or not. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of good fun stuff you can do there. Question here, right? Yeah.
Is there any like default automatic stuff for that sort of caching that you'll do during the install, or you need to do like match requests to cache files manually later on?
Repeat that one more time.
Sort of like if you cache a GIF during the install, and then later on fetch for it, will the browser know to check the cache first, or do you always have to manually intercept and check the cache and then make the request or return the cache?
Yeah. So you would have to manually do that. Usually, again, with like regex or just kind of if you have files in a certain folder. Say you have a huge file of images, you can probably set a certain take a certain subset of all those images, like a separate file, and just know that hey, these 3 files in this one folder are pre-cached. You know that, and so you can always kind of double check that one folder. You don't have to manually enter each individual file, but yeah. So there's mostly manual stuff. That's the weird thing about service workers is that the browser tends to not be super automatic with it. You get to write a lot of your own code in service workers, which, in my opinion, is the fun part. But it can be super time consuming just working with the cache API instead of actually developing a website. So
I remember Google that we talk about how complete service workers and non-staff it's actually
yeah, no, you can run some trouble with getting file names mixed up, multiple mentions, things not working out. If it's not the cache and you're trying to load it, it's like things break, and performance can get kind of skewed if you're putting if things aren't lined up correctly the way it should be. So it's a tricky thing. It's tricky water. It's tricky water trying to walk through the whole service worker thing. Any other questions? Good. Sweet. Of course, your best pal in PWA development is Linux. It just kind of sets up a whole kind of checklist, making sure that everything pays over fast enough on the networks. Good there. And that actually could help you out, determine whether it's still connection. If you wanted to push a test version of the site live, run a Lighthouse test on it, it'll actually let you know hey, it's probably not working very well on mobile site, or on slow mobile networks. So probably speed things up. Current page responding with 200. I love that so much, just because you still get a web page despite not having a network connection. So the server's not going to respond with, and I use 3500. You still get 200. You still get an actual web page. Uses HTTPS, always good. Service workers do not serve anything, like they only serve the cache assets and whatnot on HTTPS. That's why HTTPS is so important, because the service workers, that's the default. That's all the service workers know. So as long as the site from the server is being served on HTTPS, the service worker works with that. Otherwise, the service worker just can't be registered, and it's just not going to work. So Lighthouse, it's my favorite thing when it comes to PWA development. There's a few gotchas that, by kind of understanding, has helped me to really comprehend the nature of like the life cycle of the service worker. Because like I mentioned, the service worker code runs before anything is attempted to like fetch or load in the UI. And so the few gotchas, one of which is on iOS, if you install a progressive web app onto your homepage as like a little icon, there's some weird lifecycle stuff of how it loads in the background when switching between apps. And so if you open up your PWA on your iOS device, Android tends to be pretty fine. It just stays there. iOS tries to it won't keep installed PWAs loaded in the background after like 5 seconds or so. They're not even really super clear on it. A lot of people have just done testing and they concluded that it's about 5 seconds. Apple's kind of pretty, they're not very open with all that stuff. But so you kind of have to understand that there's a few things happening with iOS that is really annoying. Trying to like reload cached assets when you come back to the app. It's kind of complicated. I could go in that. It could be a talk on its own. Like I mentioned before, including a back button in the UI when if you're doing like a minimal UI in the display with no browser buttons or anything, it'd be nice to have the ability to go to the back page. And you want to put that in the UI and have that feature there. Service workers have a love-hate relationship with multiple tabs being open of the same website. It's all good and dandy, unless you're trying to update said service worker. The service worker will not work when it's updating if multiple tabs are open, because there can only be one source of truth. With the service worker, if you're trying to if you make a new tab of the website with an updated service worker, the new one will not get installed because the old one is still open and being used. And so that's actually why you can't run a Lighthouse test when multiple tabs of the same site are open. So that was super fascinating. That only one tab when you're working with service workers, because you'll run into headaches otherwise. Also, when you're console logging in like the lifecycle methods, the installation, the activation, and whatnot, because it all runs before anything's loaded, and every time you refresh a page in the Chrome Dev Tools in the console, it clears the entire console. Since the service worker runs before that refresh, or typically before the refresh, any console log in your service worker will not show during the refresh. So you kind of have to enter a preserve log command so you can actually be able to follow the console logs that you're putting in your service worker. Otherwise, your service worker console logs are just going to be cleared with the rest of the console every time you refresh the page. And understanding these things kind of helped me get more of a grasp on how PWAs work, and specifically service workers, because that's why I call it bridge code. It's in the middle. It's not quite client or servicing. That's progressive web apps. Hope that makes sense. Hope you kind of get a clear picture of or a clearer picture of what they are, why you might want to use them, and just how to kind of dig into them and have fun. Any other last questions? Yes.
You touched on it a bit, but some of the reasons for going down this path, you can work offline, so this connection, that sort of stuff. The problems you mentioned about getting multiple tabs open at the same page, that's certainly something concern. So what's your sort of take on when to go with PWA versus when not to go with PWA? Right. That use case.
Yeah. Usually like really small static sites, or even like landing pages, PWA setup would be like overkill for those things. In my opinion, PWAs are really useful for websites that get a lot of traffic, that are constantly servers are always like pushing out more like website content. Like, I mean, things like Twitter, Facebook, just social media sites like that are good examples. Anytime that, like I mentioned before, anytime you might want like users with slow connections, say you have a product that your target market tends to be third world countries, you would really want a progressive web app to work with those, because most likely people in third world countries are using slow connections. You know what I mean? And so for a lot of websites in 2019, PWAs could be a bit of an overkill, just to be honest. In the near future, they're just becoming more and more standardized based on Google's word. So I think just adopting a PWA standard for most sites at this point is just a good idea, just for future-proofing your site. Because, I mean, there's always constantly more browser APIs and browser features that are coming out that PWAs are going to be right alongside that development. And so at the moment in 2019, there's plenty of reasons why you probably don't need a PWA now. But in order to future-proof your site, I would probably highly recommend it, and Google recommends it as well. So, yeah. Yes.
Any emerging best practices around handling updates while the user's offline? Like, can you cache them locally and sync them back, and any server architectures to make that easier than others?
Right. So if you're updating like the normal UI, just like a regular, say, a whole like 2.0 redesign of the UI, those will just update automatically, just because it's, you obviously wouldn't want to intercept that, and so you just don't write code to intercept that, and it's just going to go through automatically. The whole update thing that I was referring to with the browser tabs was specifically updating the code to the service worker.
Sorry, I mean, a user makes an update to the data, right? Like,
Yeah,
you're
that's
offline.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You tweet,
Right.
right? Like, do you store the tweet locally and wait to come back online?
Yeah,
How do you
sorry.
sync stuff up?
Yeah.
That sort of
Right. Yeah, so that's exactly what you do. So for example, kind of mentioned the e-commerce site. If, say on the back end, you have a user's cart to have like a certain amount of items in their cart that they're gonna pay for later. And then they go offline and they add more items to that cart. You can go back and say the next time they have a network connection, then you send that back up to update the cart in the back end. And then, so you can so for example, tweeting, you would save a tweet for later. That's actually what the light version of Twitter does when you install it, is you can actually hit the tweet button, and if you have no connection, it will literally just tweet it out for you automatically next time you log into the connection.
Does it need to be foregrounded to check the network change, or can that literally happen? Like, if you're offline and you leave the app?
So you have to write that code in the activation section. That's where something you would do is, okay, we finally have like the open pipeline. Now anything in the cache, now send those.
Even if you close the app though?
Oh no, yeah. If you're logged out of or outside of the app and you're just scrolling around whatever, and the app is not in use, it's not going to do that automatically. You have to have it open. Otherwise, the browser can't access the service worker. So you have to actually have the website open in the browser for said browser to do anything.
What you do is hit about it. If you have the data, it's going to have closed it. So it would do that either way.
I think you have to request escalator privileges for like the app to be active while backgrounded. I don't do a lot of privileges on that.
I wonder if there's events for like when the phone loses or gains connection.
Yeah,
that'd be pretty cool. Just like,
I'm sure there is. Yeah, I've never had to do development with that, just for my use cases, but that's something to look into for sure. That's nice.
So where is that local state changed? You have to manually push that to the server.
Yeah. So using the cache API, it's all in the browsers. You can cache certain state changes, which is actually super nice because the cache API, you can cache state values and whatnot, and so it makes it nice where, again, next time it's a network connection, I notice something's changed, they've changed something while offline, then it'll update the backend So it's almost like rather than the server being the source of truth for the client, service workers, you can kind of turn it around to where if it's been offline, you can kind of make that source of truth. And it'll override and rewrite the data on the back end. So makes it really nice to do that. Any other questions? Yes.
How many devices do you test in when you're building PWA? Like, are you testing in like 10 phones or 1 phone?
As many as possible. Yeah. I usually, I mostly test on the latest, like Android and iOS devices. I honestly just call up my friends and say, hey, I send them like the super random long URL that I use in Netlify, for example, and I would just say, hey, go to this site and send me a screenshot of this or whatever. Just because I just don't have tons of devices to build on yet. But yeah, I try to test as many as possible and as many browsers as possible. The cache API tends to be pretty standard across browsers, so that's super nice. But again, it's always good to check and make sure it works on Firefox and the mobile versions of all of those. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
All right, we are a little bit over time, 5 minutes over time, but thanks very much to James, Jacob, and Vinh. And remember, October 19th, Lightning Talks at Procore. Time to sign up. Thanks.